I'm going to, okay. Stowe has, Vanbrugh has frequently been associated with the design of Stowe House. And the task I have set myself is to understand what buildings still exist that are by Vanbrugh, and is there any drawn evidence of a more extensive Vanbrugh scheme for the house. By piecing together the various pieces of written information and drawings, I have drawn out a scheme of a design that Vanbrugh may have done. Only small fragments of this were built, and these have been much altered in the intervening years. The house that Vanbrugh first saw was a house designed by the architect and master joiner William Cleary during the 1680s, two top images. It was a typical late Stuart house, inherited by Viscount Cobham, a friend of Vanbrugh from the Kit Kat Club. Vanbrugh was recorded to have visited Stowe in 1719, 1724, and 1725. His role was to extend and adapt it as the house functioned perfectly well for Viscount Cobham's needs. It was therefore a very different brief from Vanbrugh's other two Kit Kat Club projects, Castle Howard and Blenheim, which were both designed from scratch. In the middle two images are pictures by Jaques Rigaud of 1733, which shows Stowe 6 years after Vanbrugh's death. By comparing these two drawings, you can see how Stowe changed from the 1680s to 1733, which covers the period from 1719 to 26, when Vanbrugh was working there. Not every alteration shown on the Rigaud views is by Vanbrugh. His involvement was only 6 years of this 50-year period. It's very hard to work out what Vanbrugh's intentions for Stowe were, because there aren't any drawings attributed to him. Also, there's very little documentary evidence. Stowe was much altered after Vanbrugh's death in the mid-18th century by Earl Temple, when he transformed it into a neoclassical house, as you can see from the corresponding photos of Stowe today at the bottom of the sheet. The critical image is a drawing thought to be by Bridgeman, which shows how Vanbrugh's Stowe may have looked. This is the image I have used, as well as the William Clear drawings, to generate what Vanbrugh's design would have looked like. Starting with the plan, the top drawing is my plan of Vanbrugh's Stowe with the later 18th century buildings in grey. Vanbrugh was altering and extending a house by William Clear. The main block on the Bridgeman drawing is a dressed up version of the Clear house, which you can see below. The outbuildings were all built before Vanbrugh came to Stowe and can be seen on the sketch of the 1680s, bottom centre. In fact, all Vanbrugh had designed from scratch were the two offices at both ends. There is an anonymous quote from 1724 which backs this up, describing Stowe as a house of 13 windows in front with offices at both ends built by Sir John Vanbrugh. Offices in the 18th century was a polite word for lavatories. So in 1724, only the lavatories were attributed to Vanbrugh, nothing else. The image at the bottom left shows how my plan fits with Stowe buildings today. Having worked at Castle Howard, I'm familiar with the plan. In this image, I have overlaid Castle Howard on Stowe at the same scale. As you can see, the Great Hall is much the same size as Stowe's entrance hall. The garden room and 2 rooms either side and the central corridor are all of a similar scale and proportion. Following the Bridgeman and William Clear drawings, I have mapped these onto what currently exists at Stowe and came up with this drawing, which shows all the elevations and plan. As the Bridgeman drawing is lacking in detail and is incomplete, I've had to guess what Vanbrugh would have done based on his other buildings. Other architects doing this study may well have come to different conclusions. The problem with a drawing as opposed to a piece of writing is that you cannot say possibly or conceivably, you can only draw the single most convincing option. I also did some perspectives of what it would have looked like. This is it from an aerial view from the north, showing Vanbrugh's Stowe with the Bridgeman landscape behind. Taking each elevation one by one, the north front is probably where Vanbrugh had his most influence. Looking at the William Clear drawing, that's a bit of a shame. There was supposed to be a red patch on this drawing. Can I point with this? Which one? Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. Taking each elevation one by one, the north front is possibly where Vanbrugh had the most influence. Looking at the William Clear drawing, the red patch is basically the portico and the two windows either side. So it's the middle 5 windows plus the break. I don't know why that hasn't come up. Currently has 3 equally spaced windows on the same plane. So the break front on the edge of the red patch has been removed, and the next window in has been pushed forward and moved towards the others to make 3 equally spaced windows on the same front. This would have been a major piece of work, rendering the house uninhabitable for months, possibly years. As you can see from Stowe today, this actually has been done, and it is recorded on the Rigaud engravings, and so very likely to have been by Vanbrugh. But I think it would have been done after Vanbrugh's death, as he does not speak about it himself, despite saying that he stayed at Stowe for a fortnight in 1725, only a few months before he died. Looking at the whole scheme quite broadly, it looks very like Eastbury with the towers and the portico. Admittedly, the pediment was later on Eastbury, but the general configuration seems very similar. What was built can be seen on the Rigaud drawing, a less ambitious, slightly compromised version of what Vanbrugh would have done. The towers are lower, and Vanbrugh would have never shown a roof like this in such a prominent place. All his major houses have their roofs hidden behind parapets and walls. The portico is often thought to be Vanbrugh's work, but it does not look like it is by him. I think that it is a Vanbrugh design, but executed after his death. This may have been Gibbs, but he does not claim it as his in his very specific description of his work. So I think it was a master mason working directly with Viscount Cobham with a set of drawings by Vanbrugh. One thing that's striking about this portico is that the Ionic columns are too long. They are about 10 diameters high, and Ionic is 9. It seems that they have been stretched. What I wonder may have happened is perhaps Vanbrugh designed a Corinthian or composite portico, which would be 10 diameters high, and then as a cost-cutting exercise, they decided to make it Ionic, which is much less expensive because you are not paying for the decorative leaves to be carved. I calculated for this portico there would be about 100 leaves, each taking about a day to carve. But they kept the column the same length because at this time there was no attic story and the cornice would have to line through with the eaves. So what they built was Ionic, but with Corinthian or composite proportions. The capitals themselves are a standard Ionic capital based on a design by Scamozzi. These capitals were used frequently throughout this period from Wren onwards. The top image is a capital from All Saints' Church, Northampton of 1680. Very similar capitals were used by all major architects until the mid-18th century. Vanbrugh did use the Scamozzi Ionic at Castle Howard, but the ones he used were very unusual with extra foliage and idiosyncratic decoration. The Stowe North front capitals are very standard, and this makes me think that this is Viscount Cobham working directly with a master mason and no architect. Interestingly, the North Portico capitals are almost identical to the capitals at the Temple of Ancient Virtue at Stowe, and I'll come back to that point. This is how the north front would have looked, and in the foreground is me discussing Stowe design with Vanbrugh and Viscount Cobham. On the south front, to make a wider portico like the Bridgeman drawing shows, again the pink part's gone, so it's this here. On the south front, to make the wider portico like the Bridgeman drawing shows, the pink part of the clerery facade would need to be demolished, as the north front. I suspect that the work on the north front was far more onerous than Cobham imagined, and he did not have the appetite for this, so he did not build the Vanbrugh facade. As you can see from the Rigaud engravings, it's very much the clear elevation, with the break fronts and the pair of windows either side. And as there isn't room for a giant portico, like the one Vanbrugh suggested, whoever designed this facade, and it could well have been Gibbs, did a superimposed order which is far narrower than a giant order. For the pavilions, I was looking at Stowe House, and this is an adapted version of the outer bays, and I think it would be very close to that. Also, probably quite similar to the Queen's Chapel. Coming to the colonnade, there are a total of 16 Ionic columns running along the facade, and they would be about the same size as the 16 Ionic columns for the Temple of Ancient Virtue. And so it is perfectly possible that these were recycled for Vanbragh's south front, if it was ever built. This is a perspective of the south front viewed from the southwest. The most significant buildings for Vanbrugh were his offices at both ends. The main configuration is based on the pyramid gateway at Castle Howard, which looks very like the original Bridgeman drawing. But, as you can see, this design has been much altered over the years and built up. In my view, the only piece of stonework in the whole of Stowe that you can see today, which designed by Vanbrugh in his lifetime and actually built, is the archivolt to the central arches. Having carried out this study, I think that Vanbrugh did design an entire scheme for Stowe, but only the offices were carried out while he was alive. Viscount Cobham kept the drawings and executed the north front after his death between 1726 and 1733. Cobham's now demolished pyramid of 1726 in the grounds of Stowe backs up this case. The inscription, among the very many buildings of these gardens designed by Sir John Vanbrugh, Cobham wishes this pyramid to be sacred to his memory. This shows that Cobham did not feel that Vanbrugh's work on the main house was significant enough to mention in this inscription. Also, Cobham was happy to use drawings by his architect friend after his death. Having done this study, I can conclude that Vanbrugh did a detailed scheme for Stowe with a full set of plans, sections, and elevation. The Bridgeman drawing, which looks convincingly like the work of Vanbrugh, is the only record of this now lost design. So I believe that this was his intention for Stowe, and it would now look like this if he had lived longer and no later architect was involved.